What you're looking at here is the extent of Milestone Cranberry Bog. As I said before, the cranberry bogs themselves originally were about 234 acres of bog. We've cut back as far as because the price and so on of the cranberries. So we cultivate maybe half of it, maybe 100 acres or so. The bog initially was one single large bog, but when they started water harvesting, and the reason for water harvesting was because of the labor, it was very labor intensive. From the earliest times, berries were collected literally one by one. People would go down in the bogs. The Wampanoag, the natives who lived here on Nantucket for nearly 6,000 years, used cranberries that grew in the bogs naturally. They would go in and collect them. They used them as a medicine. It was a salve for wounds, and they had other number of other uses for it. What they would do then is literally handpick the berries one by one. Up until about 1900, all the berries were literally picked by hand. There's a painting of, it's called Cranberry Harvest Nantucket. It was done here on Nantucket in the 1880s by a pretty famous artist, Eastman Johnson, who lived here on Nantucket up on the cliff. And he did this very famous painting. It's out in the Timken Museum in California. And it's called Cranberry Harvest Nantucket. It was done in the early 1880s, and you can see women with long sort of dresses, actually sort of like aprons that were oilcloth, so they were down on their hands and knees. The men had overalls, and they wore fingerless gloves called stallings to protect their hands. And they would literally drag their fingers through the vines and collect the cranberries in a 6-quart measure. That's how they got paid for the cranberries. It was said that a good picker could pick one of these 6-quart measures in about 15 minutes or so, and they got paid, this is during the 1880s, at 10 cents per measure. So, it didn't sound like much today, but it was, real money back then. They would let the kids out of school early in September to help with the cranberry harvest. And it's cranberries that really kept Nantucket alive from the end of the whaling era in roughly the late 1840s. When we had the Great Fire in 1846, and there were a lot of stuff happened. The gold rush took a lot of the whaling traffic out to the gold fields and so on. They discovered how to refine kerosene from oil in Pennsylvania to replace the whale oil and so on. So all those things were happening. The population of Nantucket dropped from about 10,000 in, say, 1845 to under 3,000 by the time of the Civil War in the 1860s. So what happened during that time, it was very hard to maintain yourself, because there were no there was shipping back and forth, but in terms of growing your own food and this sort of thing, a lot of the farmers just moved off island. They took their sheep with them. They took their knowledge and experience and all that sort of thing with them. What really kept Nantucket alive during that 50-year period, from the end of whaling until the turn of the century, when Nantucket was sort of discovered as a resort island, place to come and vacation and so on, was the cranberry harvest. So just to give you an idea as far as the price of cranberries, back in the during the Civil War, it was General Ulysses S. Grant who is really responsible for cranberry production, in that he needed to feed his troops. And of course, all the transportation by then was either by train, if there were tracks and so on, or a wagon train. So they needed something that was nutritious, something that didn't require refrigeration, because there was no refrigeration. And so cranberries were perfect. They were nutritious. There are several recipes from that period of the Civil War where they would boil up a quart of cranberries with a pound of sugar, brown sugar or something. And the price of cranberries at that point, this is the 1860s, was about $20 a barrel. A barrel is a 100-pound weight. Goes back to the whaling era. And so they used a barrel of cranberries was selling for about $20 per barrel, or 100 pounds. Last year, with our harvest here on Milestone, we were getting, I think, $28 a barrel. Now, you factor in 150 years of inflation, and it gives you an idea of how valuable cranberries were as a crop. It was referred to as red gold because of the value of the crop. So that was really what kept Nantucket alive. That's why they would let the kids out of school early to help with the harvest, and it's really what kept. It was the economic engine, let's say, during that period. So anyway, that's a little of the local history of the cranberries. You can see over on the far side there, that area looks like it's been dug out of the hillside over there. That's the sand pit that we use to cover the sand, cover the bogs with that layer of sand every 3 to 5 years. You'll see there's another pile of sand over here. We collect it over there. The sand has to be screened. It has to be, we're looking for a certain grain size. We don't want any stones in it, so we run it through a screening process so we can get piles like that we can then spread over the bogs during the winter months. The way we spread the sand, by the way, we used to do it because the bogs would freeze. We'd flood them with water to protect the vines over the winter, and we still do that. It keeps the vines from drying out. The ice, the water doesn't harm the vines or anything like that. So over the winter then, we'll flood the bogs, and what used to happen is the bogs would freeze on top. Now it's been with, I don't know if it's global warming or whatever, but anyway, we haven't had any really cold winters to freeze the water. But when they did, they would literally take the sand, put it on top of the ice, spread it out on the ice, and then in the spring when the ice melted, it would gently fall down. Nowadays, we have to do it, we have to spread it. Actually, we use a bobcat, sort of a front loader, to pile it up over in the bog itself, and when we spread it, we have some manual spreaders and so on. It's a lot of work to do that, but anyway, that's one of the requirements. You notice how level the ground is here. This is very unusual for Nantucket, particularly in the northern part, because this is literally the edge of the ice sheet, the glacial moraine. And to find this very flat area between these two rows of hills, as I say, that's because this was all a huge, relatively huge lake bed for during the glacial, at the end of the glacial period. The other structures that you see around the property, these buildings here are pump houses, and you see the pipes that go into the ground here. All of these bogs are irrigated with pipes that cross the bog, and we have a sprinkler system so that during the heat of the summer, because the bogs are low down, they're out of the breeze, on a sunny day like this, it gets pretty hot on top of the bogs because they're all dark and they're absorbing a lot of heat. The peat itself is very dark, so it's absorbing a lot of heat. So to keep the berries healthy, we have a sprinkler system, and you'll see sometimes during July and August, you'll see the sprinklers going, and that's to keep the berries as they're forming cool and to make sure the vines are there. Now remember, all the bogs, each bog has a ditch around the edge plus the lateral ditches to make sure that that water is going into the peat layer underneath so the vines can remain healthy. So you'll see a number of pump stations. There's one there, one over here, a couple down by Gibbs Pond, which is over on the east side of the island. There's a fair amount of equipment that's needed too. We mow the fields. You notice all the pathways around the bogs are mowed, and we do that because otherwise all of these grasses and weeds and stuff all produce seeds, and the seeds blow into the bog, and you don't want to have a lot of competition for your cranberry plant. So that's why they keep these fields mowed up here, so that they can so they don't disperse their seed in the fall.